This is the Final Word Cricket Podcast. Adam Goins, Geoff Lemon, the weekly edition. There's a lot of editions at the moment. There's the weekly, there's the Storytime weekend, there is the daily, which will start again from tomorrow. We're recording this on Tuesday. The women's test match starts on Wednesday. I'm heading down to Bristol tonight after doing a blast game in between time. So it's been a busy little stretch for me, but wouldn't have it any other way. How are you going, Geoff?
I'm all right. I've spent my last couple of weeks just clearing out a storeroom full of all of the assorted detritus of my entire life. So I've been posting some of the highlights up on social media,
Yes.
and otherwise having an enjoyable time, reading all my old detention slips from high school and that sort of thing.
We're going to be talking to Snehal Pradhan later in the episode about the women's test match, but not just that, more broadly, the state of women's cricket in India. There's been a lot of debate around it in recent weeks, not least from the reporting of Isabel Westbury, and I thought it was a good time to just take stock with Snehal, who's written an excellent report into exactly that, alongside some other members of the Final Word community who you've heard from in the past. So that later. In the short term, Geoff, actually, before we go anywhere, speaking of friends of the Final Word, Ebony Rainford Brent, MBE, that news came through, I think, on night 2 of the test match when we were up at Birmingham. Of course, we're all very excited to see that news come through, recognising the great work she's done, in so many different facets of her life, but in more recent times, the ACE program. We've had her on to discuss that when it was launched last February. We had her back on last November to talk about the extraordinary summer she had in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement, and to think that she's now been recognised in this way, isn't it a wonderful thing? I don't think anyone in the cricket community more generally could have been anything other than chuffed when they saw this come through on social media on Friday night.
Definitely deserves recognition. The question is, has Ebony's work on the ACE program been harder overall than Paul Collingwood's 7 runs at the Oval in 2005? Was that did that require more of an investment of time and effort and personal sacrifice? Maybe it did. Maybe it did. Who am I?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? The thing with the honour system is you see some... I mean, I saw one in Australia the other day. I saw an honour that was handed down in Australia, and I won't go into who, which was... I mean, it's right up there with the most disgraceful examples of this. Clear partisanship, and it's just awful how muddy this gets sometimes. But on other occasions, you get someone like Ebony pop up, and it's such a universally welcome thing, and you can see where it does have merit in being able to have a process where we celebrate people who've gone above and beyond, and that's certainly the case for Ebony Rainford Brent.
I'm sure it's not universally celebrated. I'm sure that black women being recognised for their achievements in trying to promote an end to racial discrimination is not universally welcomed.
Well, yes.
And there are plenty of awful people out there. That's the catch with these sort of honours systems, is that they are recognition for people who've done some great things, but they also get given to some truly awful individuals who happen to have a relationship to power. And so then that devalues it for everybody else who's actually got one for doing the hard work. If you're someone who's done the real drudge work in your community for decades, and then you're up there next to some politician who's got one for having been an MP and being paid several $100,000 a year to rot the expenses system and do absolutely fuck all for about 30 years, well, it rather undermines the gesture made to the person who actually put in.
Yeah, and a lot of politicians do get recognised in these honours, and some for greater contributions than others. I mean, it's obviously very appropriate when former prime ministers get recognised. But anyway, this is a different sort of wormhole that I don't think we should get into, because otherwise we may never get out.
But haven't they already got it? Isn't a former prime minister? Haven't they already been honoured because they have the title of having been a former prime minister? Do they really need an AO or whatever it is?
I think they usually get made an AC. I think you're allowed to have at any given time. Is it 50 ACs, 50 living ACs? Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's
okay.
This isn't important. This is a cricket podcast.
You're an AC.
I am an AC. I doubt I'll be an AC. Put it that way. Geoff,
will you be an ACDC?
AC? Yeah. Well, I don't think any of those things will happen. We have just had a delay on opening up over here. The UK is going to be waiting, England specifically, I should say, waiting a further month before restrictions lift to the extent to which we thought they might. You're heading the other way now. It feels like all year, Geoff, we've been going into one lockdown or coming out of another at different points, but we didn't think it necessarily would be as you're trending towards winter, or you're in winter, aren't you? It's June now. And as we're heading into summer, that we'd be pressing pause. But such as the vagaries of COVID, and that certainly influenced the conversation that Tim Paine was having with the gathered media yesterday, which I thought was worth starting on. So Paine hasn't really spoken a lot since the summer, and fair enough, by the way. Why would he? He's having a breather after a fairly intense summer for lots of reasons, and the degree of difficulty last summer for all players involved was increased on the basis of the bubble system. And it feels like that's exactly...
In many ways, like, we've talked about the handful of billionaires or whatever who've done well out of COVID. In many ways, Tim Paine has, because it's a pretty good deal to be a test captain whose last test was in the middle of January and whose next test is in the middle of November, and you get a CA contract for a year out of it.
Well, that's true. You're basically it's like the old county contract, 6-month contracts where... Well, in Payne's case, he's playing cricket for 6 months a year and training for the other 6. But yeah, I suppose this has all come to a head in the last few weeks. We mentioned last week that some players may not go to the West Indies. Well, it's confirmed now, or at least it's been reported by the SMH, that Steve Smith, David Warner, Pat Cummins, Glenn Maxwell, Marcus Stoinis, Jai Richardson and Kane Richardson won't go to the Windies or Bangladesh. And I suppose the majority of that cohort will end up in the UAE for the IPL in September and into October, and I suppose even potentially into November, come to think of it. But then, and some of them will be at the 100 ahead of that, I guess. I'm not sure how they'll quite structure that after not going to an international tour, but nevertheless, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them ended up in the UK for the 100. And Paine was making the point in his press conference that there'll be players in his test team who've done hotel quarantine 6 to 7 times, so 12 to 14 weeks. I mean, depending on where they've been, but up to, let's say, 12 to 14 weeks of time in a hotel with the door shut behind you, and how that is taking such a toll on these players, and how he thinks that's actually a real threat on the field in terms of what they can achieve this summer. So it's the first time we've, I suppose, heard Paine be so forceful about this. Last year he acknowledged that it was a challenge, but it was kind of the we're all in this together kind of thing, and it's just a short-term problem. Everything will get back to normal soon. But now that we know that in all probability this will last for at least another year of having to bubble and quarantine from place to place, it does change the dynamics of the Ashes summer that's coming up.
Well, you and I have both done one quarantine, and the prospect of doing a second one is quite onerous to both of us. Yes. Imagine doing half a dozen of the things. I did note that Tim Paine said that 6 to 7 quarantines would be 14 to 15 weeks, which was an interesting bit of arithmetic on the fly. I identified with that particular bit of calculation. But yeah, 12, 14 weeks in a year. Doing it once is bad. Doing it twice would be a lot. But going back in for your third or your fourth or your fifth time where, literally 14 days where you can't leave the room and you're just sitting in there watching Sopranos and, being pretty glad that there's not a balcony, like, it would get to you. It would do your head in. So I'm interested to see what happens here, and I'm sure there will be blowback no matter what happens. Do you reckon these players will go to the IPL? Can you see that happening?
I do.
Skipped out of an Australian tour?
I sort of see why won't they? They've skipped out of an Aussie tour, sure, and I get that, by the way, no criticism. I see no reason why they should go on this Australian tour to the Caribbean and Bangladesh. I'd love them to go, but based on what's just happened in the last few months, I never expected this group to go. But
the argument would be from a lot of people, think of calling up the talkback line. You'd be saying, well, these guys are getting paid maybe a couple of $1 million from Cricket Australia in a year. Why aren't they going on an Australian tour? And why would they be allowed to go for an independent tournament where they're paid separately on top of that? It's not like people always talk about IPL money is crazy money, but it's not actually necessarily that much more than a top tier Australian player is getting on their contract.
Yeah, I think it's just timing more than the stature of the competition and the fact that the T20 World Cup will be squeezed in. That's what I meant when I said October, November, by the way. There's the IPL, which will be in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, followed by the T20 World Cup, so that they'll already be co-located. So I think that stands to reason that I don't see any of them pulling out of the IPL when there's a T20 World Cup in the same country within weeks, or the same cities even within weeks of the IPL finishing, within days of the IPL finishing for that matter. So that'll all line up. But then they come back from there, Geoff. They have 2 weeks of hotel quarantine.
That's sorry, just to come in. That's what I thought. That's why it actually makes sense to me. Like there will be complaints about it, but I would reckon going and playing the IPL is better warm up and preparation than going on this West Indies tour in June, July. Playing in the UAE where the T20 World Cup will be, right before it, against a lot of the players who'll be in it. Being able to suss out those players on the field, suss out your opposition, see how they're playing, and have an idea of how you're going to combat a whole bunch of the stars of the opposing teams when the World Cup is on. That actually seems like ideal preparation for your best players.
And so would it be playing 5 T20s in the West Indies. Remember, they're only playing T20s in the West Indies to discharge the World Cup Super League commitments first. Now, this is one of those things where I feel a bit sorry for the creators of the World Cup Super League, because now it looks like these are kind of useless tack-on tours, and they're not at all. They actually are a good thing. Restricting one-day series to 3 matches, having context around them, having an organising structure that goes all the way through to associate cricket makes loads of sense, and it does mean that each one-day international played in a 4-year cycle does build into the broader mainframe. I love all of that, but it's just not been... There's not enough education around it because it's been affected by COVID from the outset. So that'll get better in future cycles, I suppose. But yeah, the point I was making there is that they'll leave the T20 World Cup. This will be the same for England, by the way. They'll fly into presumably Hobart and quarantine there because they're playing the Test match against Afghanistan. I'd imagine like within days of coming out of Hotel Q. I've even been thinking about it for Rach and Winnie and myself. Like, how do we land the ball as close to the pin as possible? Not having a clue whether it'll be 14 days, 10 days, quarantine at home, quarantine in a hotel. I mean, it's just impossible to read the tea leaves at the moment. But either way, Afghanistan, the Test match is inked in the schedule. We know when it's going to be in the final week of November. I think it starts on the 24th or something like that, Geoff, of November. And then into the Ashes, and so it goes. And presumably between times, England will play a couple of tour games as quickly as they can the minute they exit Hotel Q. Or maybe they'll send their Test players first, and they'll give them a game with what they've got here first, and then the white ball players will join a little bit later on. But yes, it's all a bit scrappy. It's all a bit unfortunate, but I don't think there's any other way. It continues to be this pattern of just doing what they can to get on the park, and commerce ultimately will dictate the movements of the players. We saw that as recently as Saturday in the Euros when Christian Eriksen went down, and the fact that Denmark continued their game, whatever it was, 3 hours later. And I know that was complicated by messages coming out of the dressing room, but I mean, Peter Schmeichel, sort of a great Denmark football, saying afterwards that Denmark were told, well, this is just an example to show how influential money is and how influential the governing bodies can be. Well, if you don't play, you will forfeit the game. When push comes to shove, teams are reluctant to do something that would hurt them on the field, in turn financially. So I'm sure they'll find a way to make this all work.
Yeah, and look, I would suspect that England will do intra-squad kind of stuff. They'll send out a bunch of players, given that they'll need a big chunk of players, given how hard it is to get players into Australia. So they'll probably do a concurrent Lions tour or whatever it is, and make it work that way. And as you said, send over. I mean, most of their Test team won't be in. Most of their current Test team wouldn't be in the T20 side. There's only a. Out of the players who rocked up at Edgbaston the other day, Mark Wood is the only one I can think of.
I think Root will be in the squad. Yeah. Wood will be there. Pressed to think of anyone else. Oh, Dan Lawrence might be there. But still, there'll be an extended squad for the World Cups as well. They'll probably have to take 20 or so players because of COVID. So thus, players from the Test group might end up over there as well as sub players.
They'll do it in the way that Australia did with the scratch match at the Ashes, and the way that India's doing for the WTC final now, and play amongst themselves rather than getting a really good 2-day game in against the Caxi at Blacktown.
Go on, play amongst yourselves. Play amongst yourselves. Be back for dinner. Geoff,
remember the Alice Springs game? Like that is the absolute best example of this, of just one board just rat fucking the other with preparation. Like, oh, you're on your way to Adelaide, is it, from Brisbane for the Ashes? Have a 2-day game in Alice Springs. Oh, the perfect preparation.
You'll never know if you never go and all that.
Have a 2-day game where the ground announcer makes racist jokes about Monty Panesar when he comes out to bat. give you the true Australian hospitality.
Speaking of CA, there's been a fantastic appointment made to the board during the week, which I was really taken by. Greg Rowell, who we both know and have had a little bit to do with, and I've interviewed him on another podcast, is joining the Cricket Australia board. That's a real win for the good guys here. He's a lawyer in Wollongabba, but of course has been very involved in local cricket and in Queensland cricket for all the time since he retired from Sheffield Shield cricket back. I suppose it would have been late 90s when he finally hung up the boots. But yes, a fascinating career on the basis that the 94-95 Australia A summer is kind of the pinnacle of it. Never played for his country as such, but played in that team and became a bit of a cult hero through that process as we went through on the greatest season that was about Australia A. But yeah, I never thought this would happen because of his politics, really. I mean, he ran against Campbell Newman for Lord Mayor in 2008 for the Labor Party. The Cricket Australia have appointed someone who's aligned to the Labor Party to the board when they're trying to line up Mike Baird to be the next fucking chairman. I mean, great. That's a good thing. I'm just surprised, pleasantly surprised, shall we say.
The Minister for Casino Construction, Mike Baird, what a great day it'll be when he takes the reins. Yeah. It's a curious one, as you say. It's interesting how this has worked out. I would think that probably even people within Campbell Newman's party would have quite liked him to go away. So,
but not then. But
know,
not this was when he was at the peak of his. This was when Newman was re-elected in 2008 with with a thumping majority. Rao didn't do well in that election, but he was the highest ranking Liberal in the country because Labor had every state and federal government at that particular juncture. And Newman was a bit of a hero at that time and a bit of a standard bearer. It was later when he became Premier that the wheels fell off pretty quickly, and he was one term in that job, then punted by the people. But but still, like that was I kind of looked up like, wow, like they've appointed Greg Rowell to the Cricket Australia board. So yeah, he'll get a great run of it. I suppose there's been a lot of change, as Daniel Bredig explained to us a couple of weeks ago. Not a lot of experience on that board right now for people who've been there for a long time. So he's part of that generation change.
Yeah, well, they've been needing some freshening up at the top, so hopefully that can happen, I suppose, with a couple of appointments with credibility in the last year or so.
We wish him well. We also wish Nick Hockley well, who we've talked about his appointment to the chief executive role at Cricket Australia. He's been on Media Street big time in the last 2 or 3 weeks, Geoff. He's been doing all the various sit-down interviews and all the podcasts. I was wondering whether we should get him to join us on the Final Word at some point. I reckon that could be quite good fun. This is a bit of a question without notice, but should we ask Nick Hockley to come on the show?
What's his position on flavoured milks? Does he have a favourite? Is he a fan? Would he be willing to do a live milk round with us? I reckon, if we teed it up?
He went on. He had some fun with the great cricketer fellas, so I reckon he might be up for it if we tee him up nice and early. So let's do that. Let's try and get Nick Hockley to join us with a carton of milk at some point in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
Before that, we will have a World Test Championship final to talk about. Now that decider can be played over 6 days, which could mean a lot of Final Word daily. The weather isn't crash hot. Different weather apps say different things, but it will be affected by rain. It could be one of those situations when they could get through 6 days and still not have a result. In which case the trophy, the mace will be shared. I don't know if you saw this yesterday, Geoff, but back in the good old days, I say the good old days, the mace was given out to the team ranked number 1, and it occasionally would be presented in really strange settings. That is, it would be they've won this
airport lounges.
Yeah, they've won this Test match, and thus in the middle of a series you get the mace. Well, now the mace is being repurposed as the trophy for the World Test Championship final. I got that email through from the ICC yesterday. Okay. So, but we'll be doing daily shows throughout.
So the question is, does the captain of the winning team get on a horse with the mace and then gallop at an opponent and smash their head off or something? Because that's going to bring eyeballs to the sport. Yeah. If you want, it's all about bringing kids to the sport, and they're all into the MMA and whatnot, and apparently all the YouTube influencers are into boxing now. What if cricket was smashing heads off with a mace? What if the stakes were that high? That would get people involved. That brings eyeballs. Literally, eyeballs would be everywhere.
I think you're onto something. So there's the mace they're playing for. It'll be. They said it'll be shared if the if the game is drawn. So I wonder whether that means it'll be like a custodial arrangement where Virat Kohli gets to have it, and Kane Williamson on weekend. Every second weekend, Kane Williamson gets to have the mace, or vice versa, or maybe shared custody where like school holidays they have a certain thing where they get 1 week each.
Or they go maybe they're on good terms. Maybe they can go on holiday together and they can take the mace with them. Like show the mace around.
Yeah, wasn't there a celebrity couple? Someone will pull me up in the comments on this who did this recently. There was a celebrity couple. No, it was Michael Clark. Michael Clark, there was a big report that he got back together with his ex-wife because they'd all been on holiday together. No. We just get on really well and we're having a family holiday despite the fact that we have consciously uncoupled or whatever the jargon is these days with celebrities when they are no longer together. So, no, but yes, what do we know? We know that Ajaz Patel's going to play, Geoff, and this excites me. He bowled so well at Edgbaston last week with his 4 wickets. Simple approach. Nothing particularly special looking about the guy. He's about 5'8".
Simple approach. He walks. It's like he's going to the fridge. Like he just walks up and stops. He doesn't even take a step to follow through. He just goes loop, and then somehow he gets this nice bounce and he lands it on the spot.
Yeah. They talk about trying to get over the front leg. He doesn't do much of that. It's just it's all kind of shoulder and finger. So he's playing. Mitchell Santner's been left out. Will Young is the spare bat for New Zealand, and all the fast bowlers are in the squad. So they'll make their decision. It's a group of 15. Presumably, we'll find out India's squad later today after we've recorded. But as we discussed on the Daily Show a couple of days ago from Edgbaston, we really know what the Indian group is going to be, and we know the decisions they need to make. It pretty much boils down to
we know who the 12 are. It's just really about
we sort of do, don't we?
How it works out.
Well, how does Jadeja get in the team? The question is, how do they get Ashwin, Jadeja, and the right balance of fast bowlers all there? If they play 3 quicks, they can do it. But if they want to play 4 quicks, as New Zealand probably will, I know Colin de Grandhomme will be the swing man for New Zealand. But then to get 4 quicks in, you need to leave out de Grandhomme and play Patel. For India, it's a fraction different. Their all-rounder, so to speak, it would have to be Jadeja, and he might have to bat quite high up to enable 4 fast bowlers and Ashwin to play. That's the issue. I think I said the other day, I can't believe we're talking about Jadeja missing another high-profile test match at the start of a series. He seems to play after they've lost early on. They bring him in when they're 1-0 down or something like that. Well, this time they don't get that opportunity. It's 1 and out. It's a final. It's a decider in a one-off way. So I reckon that they do well to reconsider that. And yes, it might mean they can only go in with 3 quicks, but 3 quicks plus Jadeja with his batting, with his fielding, with what he can do as an all-round package. I just can't see any other way. They have to pull that rein. I know it's not going to turn big down there, but it's not just about turn with Jadeja. It's about control, and it's about what he can do down the order with the bat.
It's you look at that Southampton surface. Generally, it's not hugely exciting. It doesn't do a massive amount, but it can spin. And it can spin when it's been dry, and it's been pretty dry for the last month or so down there. So it's likely to turn, and particularly if you get some play on it over the course of 6 days, that's going to keep happening. Having 2 spinners is going to be a better option than having 1 spinner. There's almost no bad surface to have a good spinner on. If you have a spinner who can hit a good length, there's always this obsession with playing fast bowlers on a surface that you think might help them. But in almost any circumstance, you're better off having a decent spinner, as long as you've got some quick bowlers to back them up. So I think there'll be a strong temptation to go with the 4 quicks, but you don't necessarily need 4 quicks. Like if you've got a decent surface, 3 quicks can do that job. But to be able to rely on 2 different kinds of spin, to have bowlers who can turn the ball either way, away from left-handers or right-handers, it just helps so much. And it helps your fast bowlers bowl better because they can get a break, they can get a rest and come back after an hour when 20 runs have been scored and the opposition's feeling squeezed. It can add so much when they come back, rather than coming back after a part-timer's been bowling and it's been a bit of a relaxation stint. So I think that he's got to play. I don't think that necessarily means that he will, but I think he has to for India to have their best chance. And so then it's a 3-paceman attack. It's Bumrah, obviously, it's Ishant Sharma, and it's probably Shami just on seniority, because those are the 3 who've done so much work for this test team and they deserve the go. But Siraj is such a a popular choice at the moment within the Indian camp. Kohli loves him. Shastri loves him. He's risen to the occasion whenever he's been asked to, and so there will be that strong temptation to get him in at the expense of somebody.
Yeah, I think that's the right combination. Look, if Jadeja bowled seam up, that'd be handy. Maybe he should. Maybe Jadeja this week I'm going to bowl left arm medium pace to help bolster the credentials for him, and because that will be the thing. It'll be who's going to bowl second change, and it's going to be a spinner early on. And on the other hand, Ashwin's shown an aptitude.
But he almost does bowl
early.
Seam up in a way. He almost can bowl seam up. He sometimes bowls just those faster arm balls, and they swing in the air a bit and they drift. He can be. He's 6 different kinds of bowlers, and he's a fielder who will get you a wicket by his fielding alone. Out of the 20 wickets in a test match, he'll get you one. He might get you 2. He might get you 3. And he might save you 30 runs in an innings in the field. So I just think there's so much more to him than just the bowling, and you put it all in a package. You have to have him.
Yeah, and you complement... you put that alongside a batting lineup which has the engine room of course, Kohli, Rahane, Pujara. We saw the way that Shubman Gill sort of lit the world up in Australia back at the start of the year. Rohit Sharma. I mean, it is an imposing team. So no matter how excited you might be getting around New Zealand right now, and I get it, I've just watched them play 2 test matches and perform exceptionally well. It's a daunting Indian team at full strength, more or less, at the moment. So cannot wait for that. It begins on Friday down at the Rose Bowl, and a reminder that we will be here every night doing the Final Word Daily. Geoff, we can't...
We'll be doing it for 8 days. I just want to make sure that we're clear on this, because we'll be doing it 8 days running. The first 2 days will be the first 2 days of the Women's Test. The next 2 days will be both the Women's Test and the first 2 days of the Test Championship final. And then we'll have 4 more days because it's a 6-day Championship final. So we'll have 8 days of daily back-to-back.
We used to do the daily. When there were doubleheaders in the Men's World Cup in 2019, we found a way of doing 2 games at the same time. You might have to go back and listen to our back catalogue to work out how we distinguish between the two, because I'll be at the Women's Test doing broadcasting on that. You'll be watching the Men's Test on those 2 days when we've crossed over. Actually, be working for the Guardian, and then I'll be working for the Guardian on the Men's Test after the conclusion of the Women's Test. So we'll be all over it here on the show. Geoff, before we get to Nerd Pledge and talk to Snehal, we couldn't leave this section without remarking upon Shakib Al Hassan's extraordinary tantrum. If we're doing a Hall of Fame today, this would be that. I reckon I've watched it 40 times. Just how quickly he decides to boot the stumps over, and the ferocity in which he goes to the other end and pulls the other stumps out of the ground and slams them in the turf. It was compelling viewing when it was doing it would have been a perfect Vine when Vine was still a thing many years ago, because you could have fit
6 seconds.
You could have fit the whole thing into about 6 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely, it would have been. And this was in a domestic match in Bangladesh. This is a guy who's lost big World Cup games. This is a guy who's been to the pinnacle, who's won test matches. Why is he losing it in a local Bangladesh game? What is there to be mad about? He's hit the guy on the pad having a sweep. He thinks it's out. Umpire says not out, and immediately he's gone the full Michael Holding, put your boot in the sky, and then started yelling in the umpire's face. And the other bit is that's some minutes later. I think that's a couple of overs later when they call it they're going off because it started raining. And he just decides to have another crack, walks up and pulls all 3 stumps out of the ground and hurls them down the pitch. It's like, I was watching a YouTube video the other day of, I can't remember which baseball manager it was, but having a meltdown where he goes out and pulls a couple of the bases out of the field and walks off with them. I think it's 20 odd years ago, but he's like, all right, no one's finishing this game. This umpiring is such bullshit that I'm going to take second base and third base and leave with them, while I'm being ejected. And it was like that. And it's hilarious, but it also makes me real. There's a definite double standard here, where if an Australian player did this, we'd be shaking our heads and clicking our tongues and saying what a terrible influence it is, or example, and all the rest of it. Maybe it's just because we're Australian, and so we feel like it reflects on us in some way. But when someone does it for another country, I'm like, that's hilarious. Let's watch it again. Why is it so funny? Just because it was a Bangladeshi player.
Shakib Al Hassan, thank you for being a friend. Geoff, before we go to our break, I think we have just enough time for a little bit of...
Nerd Pledge! Nerd Pledge. That's the game that we play with the people on our Patreon page. It's a quiz, a reverse quiz. You quiz us. People who support the show, they send us a donation, and that is an amount of currency that relates to cricket, a number that relates to cricket, and we have to work out what the number means.
And I'm just checking as we start the segment, Geoff, whether we've overtaken James. We're one behind Jimmy. We're 616 at the end of Anderson's series against New Zealand. So at one stage we were back to about 600. We're back up to 616 at the midway point of June. So we should, hopefully, all things being equal, if you're enjoying what we're doing on the final word, we should be able to get beyond Jimmy by the time he next takes the ball. By the time he were next to take the ball in a test match, which will be, I suppose, the 4th of August. So we have time on our side. And, Geoff, we have a pledge in today, just one, from Stuart Duncan, 178. It didn't come with a clue. So, Geoff, you can take it as you see fit. Have fun.
Stuart Duncan. That is a good Scottish name. We've had a few good Scottish names on the show, but that one's right up there. $1.78. So, look, the first thing that came to mind when I saw this, the number that popped into my head immediately was, is this Mitchell Starc's bowling strike rate from the 2015 World Cup? Naturally, as would occur to most people, because I knew it was around that, and I thought 12, it's not quite right, but it's close. No, the average was 10, but the strike rate, as in every 17 deliveries. So, but that was 17.4 for Mitchell Starc, not 17.8. So 178 doesn't quite fit there. But that did get me looking at bowling numbers, and 17.8 was the test bowling average of a couple of players. Albert Rose Innes, who played 2 tests for South Africa in 1889, and Joan Lillian Hawes, who played 3 tests for England in 1957-58. Probably not either of those, but the bowling strike rate of 17.8 in T20 cricket was the statistic returned by the Doc, Shelley Nitschke, who took a wicket every 17.8 overs that she bowled for Australia while taking 43 T20 wickets with her left arm spin.
You say the first thing you think of when you see 17.8 or 1.78 of Mitchell Starc's strike rate at the 2015 World Cup. When I see Joan Lillian Hawes on the screen, the first thing I'm thinking is, is it possible that's a relation of Keely Hawes, who of course was who of course was the innocent D.I. Denton in Line of Duty, among other things. I'm going to find that out. D.I. Denton, she wasn't bent. And if you've got a different view, I'm not hearing it. I'll look up that during the week, Joan Lillian Hawes. Okay, back to Shelley Nitschke.
Bent coppers. Well, Shelley debuted in 2004 and 2005 across the 3 formats, and was still around when they were starting the Women's Big Bash a decade later as the kind of veteran player at that point for Adelaide. She's the one who bowled the super over in the T20 World Cup in 2010. There was a group game against England where Australia played England. It came down to a super over. Australia had a bad one, lost a couple of wickets, only made 6 runs. We're going to a super over! And she had to bowl it, and they tied. So there was a tied super over in a World Cup before England and New Zealand in 2019. But it wasn't in the final. It was only in a group game. But Australia won on boundary count back. So England actually had been dudded by that rule in an ICC tournament before, because they did it on the number of sixes hit. England didn't manage to hit a 6 that day, and Australia had Jess Cameron, who could hit 6s and did. So
that's an even worse system. I mean, the boundary countback system is a dog shit. But how many 6s did you plonk through the court? I mean, that's so. I wonder what was it? How many did England? Do you know how many England hit in that game? None.
They didn't hit one.
None.
Didn't hit a 6. Yeah, they hit no 6s in that game.
None.
So
never had a crash.
Well, I think it was those early days of T20 cricket when it was all about you have to hit 6s. That's the only thing you're here for. And so they made the boundary countback was only on 6s. This is T20. You hit 6s. And England, they weren't really a 6-hitting team at that time. They were a stroke-making team. They were a Charlotte Edwards team. Not really a clear the ropes team. So that's how that worked out. Shelley's been coaching the Scorchers, hasn't she? Perth Scorchers the last couple of years in the WBBL.
She was the assistant coach with the Australian team for a while there too. So she's very much still front and centre of the Australian setup.
Now, do you remember Shane Warne taking a stack of wickets against Pakistan in 1995?
I do.
And Ames Sohail being stumped, the left-hander, going down on one knee for the sweep, and he gets one that doesn't turn much, and it beats his outside edge, and he's dragged his back foot, and Healy stumps him while he's still down on one knee.
Yeah, that was a nice.
Does that ring a bell?
That one doesn't, but that was something Healy did so well, and Warne too, that he would bowl top spinners to left-handers. Go over the top of the horizontal blade, and Healy knew it was coming, of course, because he's a fucking genius and would have his gloves above his head ready to go and pull the ball down almost. That was how he would execute the stumping. So, I'm not surprised to hear that's how Amir Sohail got out to Warne at one stage. No.
So I bring that up. The reason for that is that was Shane Warne's 178th Test wicket.
Very good, very good.
I
like it.
Just a new little metric I'm looking at. It seemed like a good one.
Well,
worth mentioning.
with Glenn McGrath, we could actually make this a Glenn McGrath bit, because McGrath, if you give him a number between 0 and how many Test wickets did McGrath take? 640 or something.
650.
650 something. No, it couldn't. No, it's 560 something. It's 560 something.
Sorry, 567.
567, whatever it is.
Or 564.
You give McGrath a number between 0 and 564, he'll tell you what the wicket was, how he got it, on what series, in what year. So he would go, 178. Well, okay, 178. That was the 97 Ashes when I had Mike Atherton caught behind it at Headingley or something like that. So maybe this should be.
We should do it. We'll get him on the show and do it as a party.
Actually,
piece.
This is spot on.
Every Nerd Pledge number.
This could not be more Storytime energy. We should get Glenn McGrath on Storytime purely with a bunch of numbers that are under. Geoff, now we're fucking cooking with gas to go back to line of duty. We should get Glenn McGrath on Storytime to do a series of numbers that come clueless, and he can walk us through each wicket. And I'm pretty sure Pidge would do that too. I'm going to get on that during the week.
All right. I'm glad we've got a new idea. So that was Shane Warne's wicket, 178 being our number. And then as for scores of people who've made 178 in a Test match, you've seen one, Adam. You at a rare Test match where I wasn't.
Have
there.
I? Give me a hint.
And you were there.
Give me a hint.
Well, that's the hint. You were there and I wasn't.
I was there and you weren't there. I went to India in 2017 and you didn't. Yeah. Is it on that tour? Is it Steve Smith at Rancho Relaxo?
That's it.
Bosh. The one that, according to Al Jazeera, Steve Smith was fixing at the time or some shit.
Yeah. While making 178 not out. He wasn't very good at it. Didn't work out too well. So, and there's also the VVS Lakshman 178 from Sydney.
Oh, that's the best innings I've seen. That's the best. Yeah. That's the aesthetically the best innings I've seen. Lakshman, Sydney. I mean, there's highlights from the Indian commentary on YouTube. Just dim the lights, get the baby oil out, and away you go. It's just something else. He's driving down the ground, especially his on driving, which they weren't really on drives. It was more like he made a decision to clip through mid wicket, but instead of clipping through mid wicket, he thought, what I'll do is I'll just clip next to the umpire, and I'll do it that way instead, just for a laugh. And it worked out pretty well for him. 178 runs later.
And so in terms of the list of players who've made 178, it's an absolute gold standard list. If you get rid of, I reckon, Keith Fletcher and Graham Hick are probably the only non-legends on that list, because the 178s, Joe Darling, Jack Hobbs, Neil Harvey, and then it goes Sobers, Lloyd, Richards, Hooper, Lara, just West Indies royalty on the 178s, and then Lakshman, de Villiers, Smith. It's a pretty good list of who's taken those. And the one last little bit to wrap it up is I just mentioned Neil Harvey making 178. Guess what his cap number is, Neil Harvey? Beautiful. Cap number 178.
Very, very nice, Geoff. Thank you, Stuart Duncan. This has been Nerd Pledge. This has been the first segment of our show today. Final Word Weekly. I don't know why I'm calling it the Final Word Weekly. I just feel like I have to discern between that and other shows we're making at the moment. Either way.
I think it's become that now. Maybe that's what it is.
Yes, either way.
But if you want to play Nerd Pledge, send us a number. Go to patreon.com/thefinalword. You set up your number. We'll get it. We'll put it on our list. We'll do it on the show. And Stuart, if that number, my answers weren't right, drop us a message on the DMs and we'll come back to it on Story.
Let's talk about the best cricket magazine in the world, and we'll be back after that with Snehal Pradhan.
It's the magazine that comes out once a month. The only one. The Wisden Cricket Monthly.
The only
best
one.
cricket mag in the world.
The only one.
The only magazine that comes out once a month. That's it. This is the only one. There's only 1 month. One magazine that had that idea. They thought, you know what, 12 times a year, that'll be good. Let's space it out. That's why they put it in the name, Wisden Cricket Monthly. There's the clue. And they had an interesting month because they lined up a big interview with Ollie Robinson, had him on the cover and all the rest of it, and then the story happened, as you know. So they've had to balance that out with the editorial introduction from Phil Walker, which I have to say is a very good one.
Yeah, that's right. So Ollie Robinson is still on the cover, along with 9 other England fast bowlers. And it's a great feature anyway. It was going to be about how there's all these emerging England fast bowlers like Robinson, Stone, Overton, and they're alongside Broad, Anderson, Wood, Archer. I saw Shakib bowl 2 weeks ago, Geoff, at the Roses game, and he's ready to play Test cricket as well. He's also in there on the edge of the cover, and it's quite symbolic that Shakib Mahmood's the furthest face to the side, which to me symbolises that he could be the guy that's coming from stage left that they've not even thought about in terms of an Ashes berth potentially later this year. But yeah, I think it was really well handled by Phil in the editorial, the editor's letter off the front, to explain what a torturous week it was at Lords, really, for those who followed the game closely, but also knowing full well how the culture war was going to take shape. And we went through that last week with Vish, of course, but Phil's contribution's an important one, as is the interview that Joe Harmon's done with Ollie Robinson. I know he has put a lot of work into that, and Robinson spoke with quite a lot of contrition about how he was before as well. So, yeah, there's a lot going on there, but they couldn't not take it on, could they? I mean, the magazine coming out a week after the Lord's Test, they had to be front and centre. They never shirk from a big issue at Wisden Cricket Monthly, so, yeah, a lot in there on this.
There's also a nice sort of bookend to that, in that aside from the interviews with Stone, Robinson and Overton, there's also an interview with Norman Cowans about his Test career and the good and the bad parts there. It's got an interview with Temba Bavuma as well about taking on the white ball captaincy with Neil Manthorpe. So plenty going on. I particularly enjoyed this bit, Adam. Lawrence Booth reports on the game taking hold in Brazil. Everybody wants a piece of Brazil now, don't they? We do it on the final word, and suddenly everyone else, they're playing cricket in Brazil. Brazil's ours. We saw it first.
That sounds a bit. Good isn't that what the Portuguese said? No. But Lawrence, I'm sure, has done a great job there. I haven't actually read the piece yet. They've done another bit that we've been talking about on the show too. Phil and Joe and the others who work at the magazine have tried to look at the World Test Championship and think about how it could be remodelled in future iterations. I've had a look at this piece.
I tell you what, this is just because they're not in the final. England's not in the final. They're like, we need to remodel the World Test Championship. You're not there. I'm sorry, it's happening at your ground.
Right, though.
You're not in
They're
it.
right, though. I might get Joe to come on and have a chat about that in future weeks, because I think between the two of us, we've sort of found a middle path here that involves all Test-playing nations, not just the 9 who've been 9 who've been included so far. There's this.
Well, now that you've sorted the World Cup and the ICC have taken your World Cup model on,
exactly,
maybe you can just pass them your notes for the WTC and sort that out.
I couldn't agree more. I had a conversation with the MCC a couple of weeks ago around the Law 42, around appealing, and I think we're going to get the Celebra appeal sorted out at some point as well. Watch this space. That's not in the magazine. Maybe I should put that in the magazine next month. The county files. So this is where they've made a decision to continue dedicated coverage of the county game month in, month out. So not just when they're playing in April and May and at the end of the year, but this is where they find one quirky story for all of the 18 counties and tell it in a nice sort of short 400 to 500 words fashion.
This is my favourite bit for thinking when we do this segment, when I'm like, how can I sell this magazine to Australian readers? And I'm like, like in The Matrix, what if I told you that you could have exclusive interviews with Chris Dent and Billy Gottleman? How about that?
If the world was fair, Chris Dent would be on the plane to Australia at the end of the year, at least as a backup opener. Maybe he will be, based on the way England's going at the moment. Kieran Carlson's also in the county files. Final word zone. Kieran Carlson, so don't completely undermine that idea that he did spend time in Australia, as we know.
As did Harry Gurney, played for the Renegades with great success.
He did. There's a wonderful piece which I've seen the layout of, but yet to get into it properly. But I can just tell it's going to be a belter. It's 100 years since the 345 made by Charlie McCartney at Nottingham. I mean, that's right in story time. Yep. It's right in story time feels there, isn't it?
We've discussed it, I reckon, on 6 different Storytime shows. We've discussed the 345 by Charlie McCartney. So yes, it is. As is Andy Zaltzman's column, which is entirely about the significance of the number 200 as an even number.
Good. Well, it's good. He's timed it well, hasn't he? He would have filed that before Devon Conway. So maybe they had enough time to put a little postscript in there.
Yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
But I just assumed he wrote it after.
No.
But if he wrote it before
must
Conway,
have. I mean,
he's played an absolute blunder.
Well, they were putting the magazine to bed just when everything was blowing up at Lord's, or the couple of days after. So I think, knowing Zaltzman, he's got immaculate timing. Isabel Westbury, her column is about women's Test cricket and why it isn't a luxury, why it's important to invest in it. I'm sure she's done a great job there. Andrew Miller expresses his frustration at everything being about the fucking Ashes. He says that Chris Silverwood's comments were unbecoming before this series. Liz Yammons.
And after this series, he doubled down. I wrote about this in The Guardian the other day. He just went back to the same well after the series. Really, looking forward to getting this team together for the Ashes. You got 5 tests against India first. Maybe think about that.
Liz Yammon in her county piece talks about how revolutionary county streaming has been, not just with white ball cricket now with the Blast, with the numbers going crazy, but in the 8 rounds of the championship we have had so far. There's loads there, Geoff. It's a fabulous magazine. It's made with love. It is the best cricket magazine in the world. And because you're friends with us and you're listening to this show, you can get yourself a healthy 44% discount to read it on your iPad, or other tablets are out there too, not iPads. I can't think of any others. Your Kindle, probably.
Yep.
And that's all for, what is it? It's 10 quid for 6 editions, or 15 Australian dollars. And all you need to do is to go to bit.ly/WCMTFW, bit.ly/WCMTFW.
It's in the show notes.
It's all
Don't
in the
listen
show
to him.
notes.
Don't listen to him. It's in the show
notes.
Just scroll
you
down.
You don't need a code. Usually we say at this point, here's the offer code, right? No code required. That link unlocks everything. It's a 44% discount.
That's it.
Why wouldn't you want to get your hands on
44? It's an auspicious number. It's the number worn on the back of Geelong defender Corey Enright. Number 44.
John Platten.
It's 44 years.
John Platten wore 44, 4-time Hawthorn Premiership player.
44 years, the drought-breaking premiership for the Cats in 07, 44 years since 1963. I mean, 44, the US President Barack Obama, number 44. I mean, get into it. Why wouldn't you want 44% off? Get amongst it.
Wisden Cricket Monthly, the best cricket mag in the world, in proud association with The Final Word. It's The Final Word with Adam Collins and Geoff Lemon. With us today for our feature interview is Snehal Pradhan, who is a former Indian international cricketer, but these days one of the most important voices in Indian women's cricket, both as a broadcaster and as a writer. She's been instrumental in driving the debate forward in so many different ways, and we're thrilled to have you with us today, Snehal. First of all, you must be really excited the fact that India's women are going to be taking the field for a test match tomorrow at Bristol for the first time in 7 years. I mean, it's a big achievement. It's a big day.
Yeah, it's a special occasion, and I think the best way to kind of convey how excited I am about this, and how much of a big deal I think it is I'm not the kind of person who believes that God kind of has a role to play in how things turn out on the cricket field. I mean, the cricket field is always the better person wins and loses, and I never whenever I pray, I never think about okay, please let us get this result. But this morning, just for a little bit, when I prayed, let the girls have a good one, because I mean it's just such a big one, and I allowed myself a little bit of that indulgence, and I think this is the kind of occasion that deserves it, and there's no really better way to put that across.
I think you're entirely entitled to. I'll do it again. I think you're entirely entitled to doing just that, given the amount of time you've spent arguing that there should be Test cricket for India's women, which just hasn't been there for the time you've been a journalist and the time you've been outside of the game as a player. I mean, it is unusual how this has come to pass, though, isn't it? It's not in the context of there being red ball cricket played in India. That hasn't been the case since 2018-19. It's an announcement that struck us all a bit by surprise, I suppose. And now there are going to be 2 tests for your team in the space of 6 months. I mean, it's a bit of a whirlwind.
Yeah, when it rains, I mean, we get buckets, I suppose. Why and how this has happened is a little bit of a mystery to me. The fact that, a board that has traditionally not been the most proactive when it comes to these kind of things suddenly is talking about tests with the two countries who are currently playing it. And I'm, not going to look a gift horse in the mouth at all. And the fact that these conversations are happening and they are thinking that way is great. Again, it's a little bit of a mystery as to how long this will continue, whether this will be a consistent thing. The last time India played a test, there were two tests pretty much back to back. There was that test away against England, which they famously won, and then shortly after a test against South Africa, and then nothing. So I'm part of me is slightly worried what's going to happen after these two tests. Is this going to be something consistent? I hope it is, because just from the players' point of view, it is just such a big part of a journey to be a part of a format like this.
That's the part that does get you worried, isn't it? Is how casually this seemed to come about, even to the fact that it wasn't formally announced before being made public by BCCI officials on Twitter. It was just sort of tossed out there that, oh yes, we'll be playing a test against England, and also we'll be playing a test against Australia, neither of whom had actually announced that as part of the schedule. And so at that point, those two boards were pressured into going along with it, even if they didn't want to, because it had already been put out there. And there is that worry that if it's so easy to do, it's also very easy to take away. And that curious contrast that this is a board that's not doing anything to get a women's IPL going, but is suddenly wanting to play women's Test cricket despite not having done so since 2014.
Yeah, so like I said, it's puzzling as to how this suddenly came about. I'm not going to really get into it because it is a good thing. There's absolutely no two ways about that. The fact is that women's tests are probably not the most financially priority format for any board. But if there is a board, or if there are boards that can really indulge in women's tests financially, and maybe indulge is the wrong word, invest in women's tests financially, then it is Australia, England, and India. And it's good to see those three countries are going to be playing tests this year. With the Ashes also coming up later. So again, I really hope this is a trend. What would be great to see, and I think it's very doable, is for any visiting team that comes to Indian shores to play a test match, because the host team is the one that takes care of all the expenditure when a visiting team comes over. So there is really nothing stopping the BCCI in terms of financial resources to put together a test every time a visiting team comes to Indian shores. And that would be the supreme demonstration of commitment to the growth of the test format from probably the only board that can afford it on such a large scale. And it would really change the face of women's test cricket. Let's see. That's wishful thinking.
Yeah, there's been a lot of reductive arguments about multi-day women's cricket, mostly along familiar lines, right? It costs too much money, therefore we needn't bother with it. And you wrote about this at length last year in your report, An Equal Hue, The Way Forward for the Women in Blue, which was a report on sort of the growth of women's cricket in India. Yourself, Karunya Keshav, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago, and the late Sid Patnaik. And you have there a wonderful survey with so many players involved in it, where you're referring to 98% or something like that of women who were surveyed want to play multi-day cricket, yet the BCCI pulled the rug from under that in 2018-19. You're looking at Julan Goswami, who badly wants to play it again based on the extra challenges it presents her as a player, having had that experience, been around for such a long period of time, the skill and pride that women can derive from playing the format of the game that's held up as the supreme test, and men are always saying that test cricket is the pinnacle of the sport, and yet there've only been 8 test matches played in the last decade, and India only played in 2 of them. So there's this big philosophical gap to bridge, but it feels clear to me that those inside the tent, those who play the game, women in the game, want this to happen. It's not as though the ambiguity comes from people off the pitch, administrators.
Yeah, there's no question about that, and I will acknowledge that for a number of countries, for example, New Zealand, who have an official stance towards, focusing on T20 and ODI cricket, for a number of countries, the financial realities just don't permit these kind of investments in the game, no matter how well they may be aligned with what their players want. I mean, Susie Bates, one of the greatest players of all time, to maybe not play a test ever in her career. That's the kind of stat that's going to hurt at the end of a career. Julian once told me that if women played tests regularly, she would have been a test format specialist. She could very well have seen herself quitting ODI and the T20 format, which she eventually did quit, but she would have very happily committed to the long form of the game as the one form which she wants to stick to. So there's absolutely no question that the players want it, and then it kind of becomes the duty of boards who can afford it, where boards who don't have that financial restriction, to almost enable that. Because just there's another side to this, which I argued in 2014, that it's in India's best interest to play more tests, because going back to 2014, the test format, India were well suited for the test format, because that was a stage where India were not able to really get a lot of momentum and impetus in their limited overs game. Their skills basically were really built around occupying the crease, rather than scoring quickly. So I argued in 2014 that it would be great for India women specifically, to play more tests, because they're more likely to win more tests because of the natural alignment with the style of play in 2014. And style of play obviously has changed quite a bit, but the fact remains that if they can come away with a win in one of these test matches, it'll be talked about and it'll contribute to the growth of the game, probably more than a series win in ODIs or T20s against England, for sure, not probably.
Obviously, the challenge for any of the countries who want to play women's tests is the lack of women's multi-day cricket domestically to underpin that. That's something you looked at length in the report, the domestic structure. And while there was red ball cricket up to a couple of years ago, I mean, my understanding of it was that the standard couldn't get very high because it wasn't supported, it wasn't funded. It was players basically paying their own expenses to be there and not being paid to play and all of the rest of it. What sort of structure was there before? What has been lost with the cancellation of that particular format, and where is the domestic scene now? What needs to be done?
As far as I know, it wasn't a question of the players not being supported, because those games were played at an interzonal level. So all the state teams were basically divided into 5 geographical zones, and those 5 geographical zone teams were playing against each other in a 3-day tournament, which I thought made perfect sense, because if you want to play the longer format, you want to give your creme de la creme exposure to that format, considering that that's the pool from which you might pick a test side. And then that also makes it easier to conduct a 3-day tournament like that, because 5 teams versus 37 teams is a completely different calculation. But as far as I know, the players were receiving match fees for those games, so there wasn't a question of players having to spend from their own pocket for those tournaments itself. And it was ended in 2018 in a very arbitrary fashion. So there was absolutely no clarity as to why it stopped. So I have a spreadsheet here of tournaments that have gone on in domestic cricket for women's cricket, right up from the 2006-07, which is when the BCCI took over. And that tournament ran, that interzone 3-day tournament ran from 2014-15 season to the 2017-18 season, and then just disappeared. Not just disappeared, the interzone format itself disappeared. So this is something, again, that I wrote about when the change happened, completely arbitrarily, no communication or clarification given as to why. The entire interzone format has just not been played later. So basically take the best players and put them into zone teams and then have them play against each other, which is the second highest tournament in the country behind the Challenger Trophy. That's just been taken away. So that's a whole new argument, and that's happened across formats. So there's so much happening. I think, though, it is important to acknowledge at this point that we see countries, for example, England and Australia, playing Test cricket without having first-class cricket structures in their domestic cricket and doing well in Test cricket. So there are a few players I've spoken to who are amongst the top few players who are in contention for the Indian team, who think, it's not absolutely necessary to have that tournament, to have a first-class tournament to prepare for tests, but a very concerted effort to making domestic cricket of a high standard, including a women's IPL, is definitely something that is maybe a bigger priority, I'd say, because right now Indian domestic cricket is in a mess as well.
Yeah, there must be that added frustration that you did have a red ball, multi-day structure until a couple of years ago, when in Australia and England we've been arguing for this for a long time and sort of getting nowhere really at this stage. And the interzonal system, which was that bridge, I suppose, between the sprawling structure and the elite pinnacle bit, if you like. The Kia Super League served that role in England as a semi-professional competition, which grew and grew, and now there's the 100, and of course now there's the regional structures, which started last year, and they're 41 professionally paid players in addition to the national contracts. So 58 women are paid to play cricket in England right now, which is a great thing. In Australia, they've been ahead of the curve yet further with the WNCL and the most recent memorandum of understanding from 2017, which has enabled the non-international players to have that next level up. But it seems like India have been moving the other way to an extent, whilst there is these central contracts, and that should be celebrated, and facilities are improving as well, as I understand it. But that middle bit, the interzonal bit, and indeed the women's IPL, the elephant in the room, neither of which are now really part of the conversation. I mean, you can hear the way that those who are close to people at the BCCI suppress the idea of a women's IPL. They talk up the idea of, having a 3 or 4 team competition, the exhibition tournament, but they don't sort of seem to have any real ambition for a true women's IPL in the same way that we have the Women's Big Bash League, for example, aligned to the existing franchises.
I don't buy the argument that there isn't enough depth for a women's IPL. If you want to talk about an 8-team IPL, sure, it'll be stretched. But why start with an 8-team IPL? Start with a 4-team IPL. Start with a 6-team IPL. Yep. That's absolutely something that is very much doable in terms of that depth already existing. Watching some of the domestic games, the one tournament that did happen this year, the 50-over interstate domestic tournament, and there was a crop of talented players who are nowhere near the international scene, who haven't really been picked in India squads, but these kids can play. There are videos on Hotstar of tall fast bowlers bowling Yorkers. Indrani Roy, the left-handed wicketkeeper batter who really had a good domestic season, the kind of batting effort that she put in, I'm really glad that that's been rewarded. So I do not buy that depth argument. And if you're serious about that depth argument, why not build an interzonal layer above the domestic layer? I mean, it's something that was working. It's something that the players liked. I mean, personally, I enjoyed playing the interzonals because just the standard is so high. You're playing against the best of each zone. Railways is kind of taken out of the equation a little bit because Railways doesn't play as a separate team in the interzonal format. Most of the Railways team fits into the central zone team because that's where they're assigned. But then every other zone is bolstered by the collective strength of multiple states. And so therefore you have teams that can challenge the collective might of a Railways team in the guise of central zone. So I thought it worked beautifully. And bring it back. If you think there's depth is a problem, bring it back. Let's build that depth and then have the conversation.
Where does cricket sit for women in India financially at the moment? Because we've seen one of the big barriers to getting more women involved is the cost, as well as social barriers, I suppose, disapproval that women should be involved in sport at all. But cost is a big barrier, and then even when you're looking at the professional players, the amounts that they're being paid are a very small fraction compared to the amounts that the male players are getting paid. What's the sort of overview of the financial situation?
So from conversations that we had after publishing the Equal Hue report, we've kind of been driving the Equal Hue project further by having private discussions around each theme of the report, and through one of these roundtables, as we've called them, which was focusing on the financial realities that women face. We saw that the biggest the biggest drop off is when girls have to move from tennis ball cricket to leather ball cricket, because then suddenly you have to invest in a better quality bat, you have to invest in protective equipment, and especially in the current climate, sharing of equipment, which was a fairly common practice before COVID, is not really an option. That has and continues to prove to be a huge financial barrier. It'll probably, I mean, investing in your own cricket kit will probably cost between 10 to 15,000 rupees. To give you perspective, the 4 or 5 years ago, a starting salary of a top level engineer was 60,000 rupees. So that's, you know, a chunk of your salary suddenly going into your girl's protective equipment for a sport that she may or may not continue playing for even a few months or years. And add to that the tendency to be more willing to invest in these kind of things for boys and less willing to invest in these kind of things for girls. That's the biggest financial barrier. Solving that is a hard one, because it really requires you to go down to the grassroots and find a solution there. You can solve for players who want to play higher level cricket by making higher level cricket more incentivized and making, you know, playing for your state. That's a viable financial future. And in that way, you can solve for making sure that girls who are playing at that level, who want to play at a higher level, will stay in the game, because they'll look at it as an investment you make today, but which might give you financial returns later. It's harder to solve for young girls who maybe aren't sure whether they want to play for a state, or aren't sure, and maybe they just want to have fun playing cricket. Maybe they just want to play cricket recreationally. That's something we came across in our report, and it's something which is a challenge, which is probably, like I said, harder to solve. But it's easy to solve for the serious cricketers, and there are a vast number of serious women cricketers at the grassroots who want to play for the state, who want to play for India, just because the game is so visible in India as compared to any other women's sport, maybe bar women's badminton, thanks to Sindhu and Saina. But I think I don't have the numbers to back this up, but I instinctively think that women's cricket is the number 2 sport in India after men's cricket. So because of that visibility, you have a large number of girls wanting to seriously play cricket. And therefore, it's easy to really just say, okay, we're going to raise the match fees to a sustainable level. And you'll just incentivize that pipeline like nothing else can. Right now, match fees for senior cricket stand at 12,500 rupees, which, like I just mentioned, probably covers the cost of your kit for a season. If you play junior cricket, you get half of that. And if you're not in the playing 11, you get a smaller percentage of that. So that's how things stand right now. The fact is that cricket is an expensive game to play anywhere in the world. And but just increasing domestic match fees for women will definitely go a long way to incentivizing grassroots participation for serious cricketers.
One more question about remuneration. I suppose you look. There's an idea of the glory days of railways having some competition from Air India in the domestic structure, and Julan Goswami, of course, is aligned to Air India from where she works, and it's not a model that we're familiar with in England or Australia, but the model in India and Pakistan where companies employ players to play for them, it's been very effective over a long period of time in both countries, male and female. So, maybe half a dozen, maybe 8 of the squad who are over here at the moment play for just one employer in railways, but no other employer has that status in domestic Indian women's cricket at the moment. I mean, is there any likelihood that other, be it public or private, companies or organisations might get involved as employers to lay a foundation underneath the income of players who do want to take the next step and play international cricket, or indeed just play domestic cricket? Like, is there a sense that sort of tried and true model might get some momentum in women's cricket now that there's more visibility?
I wish I could say yes, but the answer is right now no. The challenges is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation where you don't have a tournament for these companies who might, employ cricketers and form a team. They don't have a tournament to play in. That's why they don't form a team, because there's no teams, there's no tournaments. So to give you perspective, Indian Railways plays as a team in the men's tournament as well, and the women's tournament. That's just been the way the Ranji Trophy has been since its inception, or since Railways was included, and Air India doesn't, which is why there was no incentive for Air India to continue hiring women's cricketers after the BCCI took over, because they wouldn't find a place in the BCCI domestic structure. Similarly, today, say, State Bank of India or the Income Tax Department. These are bodies which hire men's cricketers and sportspersons across men and women sportspersons in other sports. For example, when I was working with Western Railway, in my department, there were 4 sportspersons hired. One was a badminton player, a male badminton player, one was a male chess player, and one was a female table tennis player. And they told me that in their respective sports, they have petroleum boards, they have the income tax boards, they have a number of public sector banks which offer employment, and therefore railways isn't the pick of the lot. Railways isn't the one destination where they should go. It's hard for that to happen in women's cricket because there isn't a tournament. I've been talking about a corporate trophy for women, which would really kind of set the ball rolling. Again, the economics of it, BCCI could incentivize a corporate trophy by just keeping a big prize pot for teams that come in and participate. That might incentivize employment. It's a tricky one though, because a lot of these companies operate on policies which aren't really framed for cricket. So will they kind of go out of their way to form a women's cricket team just because, there is this small incentive? Does it fit within the myriad of government policies which dominate and just have a say in how these things work? It's hard, but it's good to see a change in the trend. I think in the 2017 World Cup finalist team, there were 9 out of 11 players representing railways or maybe 10 out of 15 representing or employed with railways at some level. And just looking through a possible playing 11 for the test match, I see...
Well, shall we do it? Shall we pick an 11 before we round up? Why don't we pick an 11 and work out? And let's do this. Let's pick your team for tonight. So Shefali Verma, who's never played a red ball game in her life, of course, having arrived after the end of the first class comp. Presumably, she'll open with Smriti Mandana.
So I have a left field view of this. I wanted Shefali in the ODI team, but I didn't want to have her open. I wanted Jemima and Smriti to continue opening, and I wanted Shefali to bat at 5 or 6 to really come and, take advantage of the batting power play in the last 10 overs. So I have a similarly left field view of this. I mean, I'm happy that, and it completely depends on whether Mithali Raj is ready to bat 3. So have Poonam and Smriti, who are your career openers, and, skilled at occupying the crease, seeing off the new ball, those kind of specialist test match skills. Both of them have those skills, have them opening, have Mithali at 3, especially on a pitch which I've heard isn't going to be green. You guys can tell me more about the pitch, especially considering we're not using a Duke's ball, we're using a Kukapura ball.
Disappointing.
And I'm disappointed about that, very disappointed. But that makes me, want to have Mithali bat at 3, Harman at 4, Shefali at 5, Deepti at 6, Shikha, Tanya, Jhulan, Arundhati. And then for the spinner, it will be interesting to see. It basically depends on whether Poonam Yadav is back in top form.
So how are you playing the third seamer? You're playing...
Shikha, Jhulan and Arundhati Reddy.
Right. Okay. And then in terms of a spinner, well, Poonam Yadav's got one of the A contracts, right? So you think that she would have that spot wrapped up, but Ekta Bish might be more suited to bowling in the Test format as a holding bowler, perhaps.
I think the fact that Poonam Yadav has an A contract will have nothing to do with her selection, because unlike in men's cricket, where your A contract players are your all format players, we don't have all formats in women's cricket. So therefore, A contract doesn't mean automatically all format player. Poonam Yadav's form is going to be the first consideration, considering that she had a bad tour of South Africa. She was left out of the Railways 11 that played the final of the domestic tournament and that won the final of the domestic tournament.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So completely depends on whether she's back in form. I'm also of the opinion that Poonam Yadav is extremely successful in limited overs cricket because it's limited overs cricket and you have to go after her. Now, in a situation where you don't have to go after her, I'm curious to see how she will go. She hasn't played a test match in that sense. She's played one against South Africa, but I think the England batting order of today is definitely a bigger challenge than the South Africa batting order of 2014. And that was at home. This one is away on a pitch that I don't know. Tell me about the pitch, which is why I think Poonam Yadav may or may not play. Completely depends on her form.
Well, I'm not getting down there myself until tomorrow, so I'm not much use on the pitch, I'm afraid, Snehal. But I'll send you a message as soon as we know. Hey, it's been wonderful to chat to you on the final word. We've been meaning to do so for a long time. I want to recommend the report that you wrote last year. Just again, it's called An Equal Hue, The Way Forward for the Women in Blue. It was published in the Sports Law and Policy Centre Journal in Bangalore. It was submitted last year on the first anniversary of Sid's passing, which I thought was a lovely touch, a friend of all of ours, and we miss him around the traps in press boxes and also advancing the cause of Indian women's cricket, which you also do so magnificently. So thank you for being part of the final word today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Final word, Adam Collins, Geoff Lemon. Time to say goodbye. But before we do that, thanks again to Snehal for joining us today. Her words will be on, they'll be everywhere because she's prolific. She talks on the radio, she talks on television, she writes in the newspapers, she writes in the magazines. If it's about India women's cricket, she is there. So I strongly suggest that you follow her on social media. Indeed, we might drop her Twitter handle in the show notes so you can do precisely that.
Why not? Why not? Everything's in the show notes. It's a world of dreams, discounts on Woodstock cricket bats, all kinds of stuff. If you're one of the people on Patreon, can I just say thanks? Because holy shit, we're chasing Jimmy, and I think we're going to catch him. And what this means is that, like, normally making 2 shows a week takes us between 3 and 5 days of work in the week, and the only reason we can do that is because Patreon exists. And then at the moment, we're doing the daily shows as well, which means we're literally going to be working 7 days a week on the show. And again, there's no extra for that. That's just coming out of the funding that we're able to get together from those existing sources. And without Patreon, we wouldn't be able to afford to do it. So thank you to everybody who's on there. If you've thought about jumping on and you want to do it, feel free to do so. Send us a nerd pledge. And if you're not in a position to jump on, don't feel bad about it. Just listen to the show and enjoy it. We like having you here.
Yeah, and because we're making the daily shows this week and because I'm going to be wrapped up with broadcast commitments quite heavily at Bristol, we're not going to do story time, but I don't expect you're going to miss out on too much final word. You're going to get 8 days of the daily on the trot. Hopefully you've enjoyed this ep, and we'll come back to story time when there's a bit more space in the podcast feed next Saturday.
Yep, clear air in the calendar. This show's on the Bad Producer Podcast Network. They've got some other shows. You could listen to them. It's edited by DC, Dave Collins. No relation to Adam Collins, unless we can find something. We might. I don't know. Trace it back far enough. Aside from that, hey, thanks to Wisden Cricket Monthly. They do a good magazine. Thanks to Snehal for being on the show. Thanks to Adam for hosting the show. Thanks to me for doing this bit at the end.
You've done it well.
Thanks to you.
You've done it really well. Final word. Me and you, Adam and Geoff. Until next time, bye.